Hello, this is Karen Ranzi. I am so excited today to be able to present to you homeschooling during the time of the coronavirus, along with my friend and colleague, Victoria Moran. Um, we are both authors and speakers, and we also have something wonderful in common that we shared in a very exciting adventure with our children, and that was homeschooling. Homeschooling is a lifelong experience, but when we were raising our kids, we had this wonderful adventure. And so we want to share some of that with you today for those of you who are suddenly home with your kids unexpectedly. And I want to start out by telling you a couple of my experiences. First, when my kids came home from school, my kids were in school, and I've been a lifelong educator, a speech and language pathologist, and my kids, when they came home, um, it was totally new for them, and I became a homeschooler because some other friends of mine were practicing homeschooling. And so for us, it was a new situation. My daughter had gone up till third grade in school, in public school. My son had gone to kindergarten and also to preschool. I saw that other people were homeschooling their kids, and I thought it might be something that we could do, and I could do my job working per diem. And so my son came out of school and he loved homeschooling. And then my daughter came out of third grade as well. And she was in the gifted program, which they were doing logic puzzles twice a week at school. And so when she came home, we continued doing a lot of those fun things that she was doing in school. My kids, I did try to do school at home with not a school curriculum, but I had planned my own curriculum, getting beautiful science books and history books, but my kids didn't like them. They really wanted to follow their own passions and their own interests. And it took me quite a while to really get that following their interests was key, and that they actually learned more when they were following their own passions. And they would learn really every single subject just by following what they were interested in. Some other key tips, or actually benefits of them coming home, was that they had much more sleep. They were also able to go to the bathroom when they wanted without a pass, and could eat when they were hungry. So they really loved that. And when I used to work with them at the table, sometimes on Tuesdays and Thursdays, when I made them work with me, we'd be there with the dog and the food, and it didn't work out so great. So eventually I really lightened up. I took a deep breath. And even though I'm an educator and I felt like I wanted to fill their brains with information, they learned more by being super interested in the topic. We also looked for people who were working following their own passions. For example, we went to an astronomer who built his own planetarium. We visited a naturalist at a nature center who loved to share outdoor science. Wilderness instructors who shared their knowledge of Native American skills. And we spent a lot of time hiking out in nature. Drama coaches who presented improvisation and creative acting workshops. A real-life filmmaker to teach a filmmaking class to the homeschoolers. A permaculture farmer to teach a gardening class, and so many more. One of the major benefits was that they had decision-making power which they did not have in school. So I would take this opportunity, being home with your kids this month, to let them make a lot of the decisions. At the time that we were homeschooling in the 90s and the early 2000s, my kids were able to help us with making a decision to buy a car, to trips, mapping out the trips that we were taking. And we would go to places when others were in school. So it was easy for my kids to plan out the flights that we were taking, where were we going, mapping everything out. This involved reading and math, and verbal, because we had a lot of discussions about it. So there were so many decision-making things. My kids came with me to court when I had a traffic ticket. I pretty much involved them in everything that we did. Another huge benefit later on was that we did portfolios for our kids through their years of homeschooling, especially the high school years, because that's what the colleges want to see. And we put down all of their interests and what they were doing, and they did some pretty amazing things. And the colleges loved those portfolios. Both of my kids received scholarships to wonderful colleges. So I highly recommend homeschooling, and you will greatly benefit by it. I would recommend doing what your kids want to do if they like doing science experiments. When we were homeschooling, we had a science experiment day, and we invited other homeschoolers to our home with their experiments. So we had a whole day of science experiments at our house. And that was super fun for all the kids. So this is just an example of something that you can do at home, but we're going to have throughout this presentation many ideas for homeschooling and what you can do to make your kids really happy and not force them to do something that they don't love to do. Of course, you are getting assignments, and if your kids are going back to school, you'll have to keep up with those, but you'll have more time now than you did. Even if you are working at home, you will have time with your kids. So make the most of it, enjoy it, love them, hug them, especially smaller children. It's really important to make them understand that you are totally there for them right now in this very challenging time. So thank you, and enjoy our meeting here on homeschooling. I also want to read you something about my daughter Gabriella's experiences homeschooling. Girls her age care mostly about popularity at school, while she is still occupied with creative, imaginative play, even into her teen years, such as dressing up and acting out a variety of characters she has read or heard about. And as a homeschooling high school student, Gabriella exclaimed that she loves her life and loves waking up in the morning being who she is. Quite amazing, considering the pressure on most teenagers and the depression that some of them experience. And Gabriella, she played and dressed up throughout her growing years, and she acted out plays with even children who are much younger than her. Like, she was very good friends with a 5-year-old girl and did that as well. And this information comes from my book, Creating Healthy Children. And there's a whole chapter in this book on homeschooling. So the play aspect is crucial. Plenty of play may lead to increased skill in problem solving, confidence in communication, and ability to harness imagination and creativity to solve life's problems. And that's why a lot of times when some of my kids' school friends could not play in the afternoon because they had too much homework, my kids would be playing for hours, and they would totally benefit from all that play. So that is really crucial, is the play, the decision making that they have as homeschoolers. And so at this time, when parents are worried because their kids are at home, we can look at this with great pleasure, to be with our children, to join with them at a time when we can let them play longer, let them spend quality time with their families. And like I said, my children growing up, my daughter had tremendous love for playing with all different ages. So, let your kids relate to their family, even if it's online. We had a birthday party last night for one of the homeschool dads, and his daughters set up this online birthday party, and these were girls who my kids also grew up with, and all of their friends and family came online, and we all talked about him and what he meant to us. So isn't this a wonderful thing to do in our time home in this period, this challenging time? We can really celebrate our children, and just enjoy being with them. So homeschooling afforded Gabriella and Marco the time to understand their true interests, so they could begin to pursue their individual potentials. When they were younger, I told you that they played creatively with all ages. As they got older, they got into internships and volunteering. Marco was very interested in sports broadcasting, and he delved into that and went to a sports broadcasting camp. Gabriella became very interested in the environment, and she started volunteering for colleges as an environmental intern. And they kept up with all their friends, playing with them. We had a swing dance program for the homeschoolers, and my friend Lynn, who's on here today, recently sent me a picture of the homeschoolers swing dancing, and so they could do whatever they wanted, and we always looked for what their interests were, and went on to have classes on their interests. Earlier on, I really was concerned all the time about math and reading, and on Tuesdays and Thursdays, I made my kids sit at the table with me, with the dog and the food, and it got crazy, and the kids would be crying, and eventually I was like, what are you interested in? What passions do you have that you want to follow? And so I recommend at this time, I know that, teachers are calling you with work, but it's also really crucial, in addition to that, to make time for your kids, hug them, love them. It's quite scary what's going on right now. And so we really need to make our kids know that they are loved and very secure. I would like to hand this over to Victoria, and she can tell you about her homeschooling experiences. And then after that, we'll move on to Q&A.
Thank you, Karen. You brought back so many memories for me. And in fact, the way Karen and I met was I was living in Missouri and was brought out by a homeschooling group to speak for a conference in New Jersey. And we didn't even know we had the vegan, the food connection and all that. So we do go back. So I did not set out to homeschool, even though I done the home birth and some of those other things. I wanted my child to have a wonderful education. I had it in my mind that I wanted her to have a classical education. I had started out in private schools as a small child, and in third grade was put in public schools. And that was a bad memory for me. It was a real rift. I could tell the difference between those small classes and parents who cared and other students who also had books in their homes and that sort of thing. So I really wanted my daughter to have this elite sort of education. Now, I didn't have that kind of budget, but we did start her out in a Montessori preschool and kindergarten. But during her second year of preschool, her father died very suddenly and tragically. And I started to see after that that school was just not what we had hoped for her, because she was a wounded little girl and she needed more than to be one of many. So I took her out at the semester of kindergarten thinking, oh, come on, it's kindergarten. Even you can do kindergarten. But immediately what I started to see was it wasn't what I was doing, it was what she was doing. So the first thing I noticed, talking about sleep, I'm a morning person. I love 6 a.m. She has always been a night person. So once she wasn't in regular school anymore, she would stay up late. And when I would wake up in the morning and go into her room, I thought of that fairy tale of the elves and the shoemaker, because all of these amazing projects would have transpired during the night. So she would build villages and space communities, and she would write poetry and songs, and she taught herself to knit. I mean, it was absolutely extraordinary what happened at night when I wasn't even there. And because I was a single mother and I did work as a freelance writer, I used the morning to write. And then when she got up, it was time for her breakfast and my lunch. And then our day went on from there. And I realized that people listening who are just doing this temporarily, and I think probably some of you will be very glad when it's over, my great desire is that you'll get the sense during this month or this 2 months or however long this thing that keeps us in, of this kind of magic that Karen and I are talking about. For us, we wouldn't trade our homeschooling experience for anything on God's green earth. And if you can just get a sense of that during this period and something that you can take into weekends and vacations going forward, then we will have more than done our jobs today. So one of the things that I learned very early on is that there's learning and there's school. And learning can certainly take place in school. I mean, Karen and I both went to school. And yet, with homeschooling kids, it can be a little bit different. So we moved to the country a year after my husband's death. My daughter and I moved to the country because I thought that would be the simple life. Wow, that's a story in itself. It is not simple when you don't know how to live in a rural area. But I did meet other people and other homeschoolers. And one day another little girl was over. The kids were 6 years old. And I was still in the school mode, like Karen said. You know, you think, well, if you're going to homeschool your children, you're going to create a school in the home. Isn't that what you do? Well, actually, not necessarily. You can do that. There are actually 3 homeschooling philosophies. One is called school at home, and that is very much school at home. And lots of people who do that for religious reasons, they'll set up a classroom and they've got the flag and the Pledge of Allegiance and the whole thing, just like a school. In fact, I saw a funny meme the other day, one of the coronavirus kind of gallows humor memes going around. And it said, if you find my kids outside, don't worry, we're just having a fire drill. So it can be done that way. And then there's the idea of homeschooling, where it's not that formal, but it's very much more like tutoring. And a lot of times the parents will use an online program or a packaged curriculum, and they will be the tutor and they'll help the child and sit with the child. And usually there are specific hours, you know, that we do this kind of thing. Then there's unschooling. So I kind of started in that middle thing and ended up in the unschooling, which I'll describe here in a minute. But these 2 sweet little girls sat down at the kitchen table. We were going to do school. And I said, okay, number your papers. And I looked, and both of them at different ends of the table, they weren't copying each other. They had both written 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 across the page. How else would you number a paper? And it really hit me, this whole thing about, oh, you number it down this way, that's a school thing. And so I just started to see what my daughter could learn from nature, from music, from theater, which was a major interest that happened for her later. And I also started to really respect in her and the other children that I came to know that they're not looking for the easy way out. They're not looking for anything watered down. So I said to her at the age of, I guess, 6, when we were kind of first grade in the Ozarks in our little cabin, so what do you want to read? And she said, the Bible. And I said, okay, we can read some Bible stories. And she said, no, 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 not Bible stories. I want to read the Bible. And I will admit, we didn't get all the way through. And yet her desire was the real thing. She had a copy of Grimm's fairy tales. And, those things are kind of creepy. I mean, in those days, I think that they tried to scare children into good behavior. But she was utterly engrossed with this book of Grimm's fairy tales. And I remember once she left the book on an airplane. And between the time that book was left in the plane and the time that we could replace it, she was just bereft, because that was really important to her. And as Karen said, what we found is that her interests led to so many things that didn't seem to be her interests. So she inherited certain things from me, and that is that she is prone to the humanities, not really crazy about the math, science kinds of things. But there was a show on Broadway that she saw, I guess she was 13, and it was about a pair of Siamese twins in the era of vaudeville. They were named Daisy and Violet Hilton. And she became so interested in this musical that she started studying genetics. And she developed this desire to learn about genetics and the life sciences that has led to a lifelong interest. And as Karen was talking about the homeschoolers and the birthday party last night, homeschooling doesn't end. I think of my daughter as still a homeschooler because she learns every day and she has a wide range of interests. So we went to China when she was 8 years old, and she was very, very taken with that. And all she wanted for Christmas that year was Chinese lessons, because certainly there are some things that I was not able to give her by myself. So we found a woman from China who was teaching at the University of Missouri at Kansas City. And Adair, my daughter, Rachel Adair, would go there for private lessons. And I noticed that every time I came in to pick her up, they were moving. They were marching, or they were jumping, or they were running, or they were doing something. And I said, why is this? And Ming, the teacher, said, well, your daughter is obviously a kinesthetic learner, because whenever she's trying to process information, she kind of rocks back and forth. Now, if you've got a kid rocking back and forth in a classroom, somebody's going to suggest riddling. But this woman, because they do see children differently in China, understood that there are visual learners, auditory learners, and kinesthetic learners, and that my daughter would process information better if she was allowed to do it in motion. So this was a wonderful thing. And after about 3 years of Chinese, the teacher said, she really should come to my university night class. So she did, and I picked her up after the night class and said, well, what's the biggest difference between college and kindergarten? And she said, in college, you get to go to the bathroom whenever you want. So I guess homeschooling is a little bit like college too. So basically what I'd like to share, just as we close and go into the Q&A part, is that I learned through this process that children love to learn. It's automatic, it's magical, it's almost a compulsion. And sometimes for some kids, the trying to push the information blunts that a little bit. And so if this is something that you're doing now for the first time, you might see some of this coming to be. I also know that some of you have to deal with school districts and assignments and getting everything done that needs to be done. And Karen and I both had some of that. We were in different states. Missouri is a very easy state for homeschooling. You have to keep track of everything you do and show that you have done what you need to do in the various subject areas, but nobody looks at it unless you got reported for educational neglect. So I have these reams of documents about what we did, but nobody ever looked at it. And some states are much tougher for homeschoolers, just like I'm sure that some of you have more assignments from the schools than others. But if you can get that sense that there is something magical about following these children's interests and trust that those interests will lead everywhere. That was my biggest fear. It's like, sure, she's interested in theater and literature, but that's not everything. But you know what? It opened the doors that led to everything. So my daughter now is grown up. I won't share her age. And she is working in her field as a performer. She is an aerialist and a stunt performer. She did not go to college. Karen's kids did go to college. She went to a theater school, the neighborhood playhouse here in New York City. She and her husband were both touring in the same show before the coronavirus hit. And they don't know what's coming next, but they're such good thinkers. They're going to figure out what comes next. And I think that's really what we want for all of our children, regardless of what educational process we choose. So if somebody is interested in books, I do want to recommend the two that influenced me the most. One was by Robert Gallo, who had been New York State Teacher of the Year, and he ultimately just decided, oh, good grief, it's hopeless, take your kids home. So his book was called Teach Your Own. And the other one that was important to me, I believe it was just called Unschooling by a man named John Holt. I'm sure there are newer books. These both go way back. But for me, they were enough to awaken me to what it really is to grow and develop as a human being when you're provided with the substance for that, and then largely, or at least in part, left to your own devices. So
I just also wanted to add to what Victoria said, that sometimes my kids would tell me that they were bored, and that could very easily happen, especially if your kids are used to being somewhere else. And I would tell my kids that boredom is an opportunity. That is a fantastic opportunity to think about what you would like to do and just to sit and meditate on it. And most of the time, they came up with some wonderful activities and ideas for what to do during their times of boredom. And again, with the play, as I was suggesting earlier, much of the imagination and creativity of children is seen in their play. Plenty of play may lead to increased skill in problem solving, confidence in communication, and ability to harness imagination and creativity to solve a variety of life's situations. And like Victoria's daughter, I felt like that's what happened. I grew up going to school, and later on, I felt like my thinking skills and following directions for things was limited, where I saw my kids just be able to take on all different kinds of activities. Like we got some furniture, and they just got the box and they opened it up and they like put everything together. And it was amazing to watch that. I would have had to sit there and read one direction at a time. And they still today are following their dreams and their passions. And I know that Adair is as well. And so that is really what we want for our children. So taking this opportunity for those of you whose kids are in school and who did send emails to me about, should we focus on the numbers and the letters and all of the different things and making lesson plans. And, I'm sure that you are getting some directions from the teachers at school, but please use any time that you have to just really be with your kids, love and hug your kids, tell them that you're there for them no matter what, and to see what their interests are and let them take off on their passions.
And I
I have
see.
my son Marco here, and I know that he can't stay with us for that long. He's in Costa Rica right now, and this was another what I consider a very spontaneous homeschooling move, where he just like 3 weeks ago on a Monday just said to me suddenly, "I think I'm going to Costa Rica today." And we've been to Costa Rica over the years. But Marco, why don't you chime in here? I'm going to unmute you.
Okay, great. Can everybody hear me?
Marco?
Mhm.
Hello, hello. Hey, Lynn. Yeah, I mean, there's much more that went into the reasons why I came to Costa Rica, but just to go over just overall my feelings about homeschooling too. I mean, the more that I'm separated from my time when I was homeschooled, the more grateful and appreciative I am for having that time in my life. Not only has it just helped form the way that I think today and so many of the experiences that I had and just how privileged I was to, as my mom said, be able to play so much, to be able to have so much freedom and to learn from that. Every single time that I think about my homeschooling, it's always one of the best experiences that I've ever had in my life. So not only could I highly recommend it to everybody else when I have kids, I know that's something where I want to be in a place where I could at least give them the opportunity. And that's what I feel like a lot of what homeschooling is about, is giving your children the opportunity to follow their own passions. And then you're kind of like the guardrails on the side, kind of facilitate that. And I hope one day to be in the position where I could do that for my kids. But yeah, I'm here in Costa Rica right now. Going to be going to a waterfall in a little bit to go play. So hopefully I can stay and answer some questions before we need to leave.
What were
Here's
there
a
any?
question, Karen, here in the chat box. Estella is saying parents who aren't teachers have a problem organizing the day and working from home. Can you address this issue? Well, I'll start with it. And as I said, you know, for me, I worked when she was asleep. So there were a few times when I was working on books, and I can honestly tell you, I very much regret those times when I was paying more attention to the book than I should have been paying to it. And then she was doing more homeschooling with other people and spending more time in other people's homes and things of that nature. But as a general rule, in the morning, I worked, and in the afternoon, it was just for her. And that didn't mean sitting down and doing school necessarily, although in the beginning we did do some of that. And certainly in high school, there was some of that with math and some of the more technical subjects. But generally speaking, it was okay. What are we going to do today? And so I didn't feel the need to sit down and have charts and graphs and things like that, but I'm not really a chart and graph sort of person. And the day kind of took care of itself. I found that I needed to be organized about my deadlines and the things that were going on in my work in the adult world. But she really just needed to live. And then as time passed, when she got older, and she was a working actor by the time she was 15. And so, you know, things changed at that time, and she had to be places, and there was lots of driving. But generally, it was just allowing the day to compose itself, which is a wonderful experience, even for a kid to have for a month, and just know that that is one optional way to live life. What do you have to say on that, Karen?
Yeah, I mean, I scheduled lots of activities, and early on, you know, the first years, I definitely felt that my kids needed to do schoolwork and sit at the desk a lot. And you know, your kids, a lot of times when you just take some time off with your kids, they come back and want to do things. Sometimes it's just like taking a breather from work And then your kids, a lot of times, will get focused and they will really want to work with you. So
So
I
is,
would say that for the
right.
people who are in these situations right now is just make sure that there's plenty of time to play. Make sure that there's time where you can have focused discussions with them on whatever they want to talk about, not what you're talking about. I was nervous initially about being an educator and feeling responsible for them. But as time went on, I realized that was what was best for them, because they learn the most when they're following what they're interested in. When they're not interested in it, they just don't put everything into it. So my kids both got interested in topics that led them to what would be their careers later on. And that varied also as they went along. But we have a question here for Marco. Marco, when you met other kids who went to regular school, how did that impact you? Did you feel you were missing out on something?
Sure. First of all, I apologize if my audio is not good. My girlfriend and I are staying at our friend's place right now, and there's some working and stuff going on, so hopefully the audio is good enough. Um, to be honest, the best part, and I kind of alluded to this beforehand, is having an opportunity to homeschool and not just saying like your kid has to homeschool. From kindergarten up until I went to college, I always had the opportunity to go to school if I wanted to. And actually, during high school, I was very into sports. And the only way I could continue playing for the high school team was if I enrolled in high school. So that was the first time that I heavily considered going to high school. And as a trial, I went one day with a friend of mine. And just from having to wake up incredibly early when I was just not ready to having to sit at a desk for just a really long period of time. And so there were a couple of the teachers that I really connected with and I thought they were good. But then there were some other teachers that had like zero control of the classroom. And some of my friends were literally just talking to me as the teacher was giving a presentation, and it just felt very odd, and just not being able to have that freedom and having that structure of, you're in this class for this period of time and you're in that class for that period of time. It just became abundantly clear to me that it wasn't for me. So I didn't really feel like I was missing out much at all. We also had a great opportunity to know a bunch of amazing homeschool families in the area, like Lynn's family and many other families. So we had a beautiful community. So I feel like I had the best of both worlds. I had an amazing social life. I was able to learn on my own, and it was kind of just the perfect marriage. So I didn't really feel like I was missing out on anything at all.
When it came time for Marco was always a fantastic athlete, and he was in a competitive soccer league that I had mentioned. And when it came time for the end of that program, they went to the school. They went to high school. So at the high school level, he was told that if you want to stay with your soccer team, you need to come to high school. And we really went back and forth in discussions. My husband would have really liked for him to go to high school at that point, not to miss out on the sports. But Marco's reaction was that he wanted to keep his independence and his flexibility in his life, which he really loved. And at that point, he was working almost full time for Madison Square Garden. And so, yeah.
Yeah, and actually just to add on that a little bit further, like, because I couldn't play sports competitively and it wasn't really for me, I kind of took that passion and put it into something else, which was sports broadcasting at that time. And then I was able to do an internship at Madison Square Garden, and I interned for this one sports broadcaster who owned a marketing company, and I was able to compile some of the charts that he used for his sports broadcasting. And it opened up so many doors, and I kind of, put that energy in a different avenue. And I mean, overall, it led to going to school for sports broadcasting. And then after that, realizing that that wasn't exactly what I wanted to do. And then now I'm going to school and getting my master's in nutrition. And my main passion now, which I feel like I'm finally in a place where I really love what I do is helping people their health, and I hope to help athletes down the line too with their performance. That's kind of my main passion now that I've been doing for the last couple of years. So I feel like the universe has a way of working all these things out, and the timing worked out well for me.
So
Thank you.
Louise D'Amato has to leave soon. Louise, do you want to share something? You're muted. Can you unmute Louise?
Yes, yes, yes.
Thank you.
Okay, can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. Karen and Victoria, first of all, thank you for having this webinar and bringing this discussion to the table. I was in the public school system for 8 years before I finally just had to listen to my soul and leave. You know, I was in this crossroads of loving what I did, but feeling the pressure academically to focus on test scores and not children, right? So that was tough. And I taught first grade, and I also taught reading K through 5. And it was just, it was a lot. And I have a private tutoring practice now. I work from home, and I'm doing Skype tutoring now. And I wound up leaving after 8 years because I was just so burnt out from having to try to toe the line for test scores rather than putting the focus on children. And as much as my classroom was geared towards exploration and play, which you know, Karen, you nailed that. I mean, that's sort of what I tried to do, but then I felt all this pressure from admin to have results, test results. So ultimately I wound up leaving, and you know, now I do focus on literacy and reading. I work with mostly children who have dyslexia or other language-based learning disabilities that need specific help in that area. And that just brings me so much joy, because I can have my curriculum, which I do. It's a very structured sequential program. However, I could tailor it to the children, the individual child that I'm working with, their interests, their likes. It's not exactly a packaged program, so they do get to have a lot of buy-in and games and fun. So anyway, I just encourage all of my parents too, and they've asked me like, well, what do you think, you know? And I'm always like, if you can, pull them out and do them at home, because I've just been in the trenches, and I know that even the best intentioned principals, and I've worked with some amazing people, but there's that hierarchy of test scores, test scores, test scores, and results based on that, not on the child. So anyway, I'm glad you brought this discussion to the table. Thank you all for being here. I'll go ahead and put my info in the chat in case anybody is interested. You could give me a call if you have any questions, and thank you.
Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you.
Let's see, I believe Jamie is
More
next.
questions.
Jamie wants to know how you can get a kinesthetic learner to sit down and do things like writing and math. So Jamie, I think, oh, there you are, okay. First, to me, it's a rethink in your own mind. So for us, we were real easy about math till we got into high school. And I know that you have to do what you have to do because your daughter is going to go back to school. But my daughter hated math, and I hated math. I mean, it made me sad. And so, you know, I mean, we did the basic stuff. She knew how to, you know, add, subtract, divide, multiply, but we didn't really do math until she got to the high school level, where she came to realize for herself that having a certain proficiency there was something that she would need to get by in the world. Now, did she do calculus and that kind of thing? Absolutely not. But she knew from the time she was 9 years old that she was going to be an actor. And so she didn't need that. And I know some people would completely disagree and say, well, she should have had that, and then she would have had more choices. You know what? Even if she had had that, she would have not made those choices. So I know you don't have the option of putting off the math, but can you figure out ways to make a game out of it, to make fun out of it? And why sit down? Why do you have to sit down to do math? Because I don't know what level, you know, your daughter is at, but let's say she's learning 6 + 4. Well, can you jump as many times as is 6 plus 4. Now, what kid would not want to jump up and down 10 times? And then let's do it again and count and make sure we got the right number. And it's just an entirely different take on things than when it's just like sit down, do the paper. And then even though there's some of that that's going to be involved in it, it makes it less oppressive. Now, writing is all about reading. Good writers are made from good readers and people who love to read. I remember when we lived in the country, we left there when my daughter was 7, and she walked out of the library one day and got in the car and said, "We have to move." Well, I disliked the country and I really wanted to move. I was happy to hear that she did too. And I said, "Why?" She said, "Because I have read all the books in the library." So she'd read all the books in the children's section of the library, and so it's time to move. So to read with your child, read stories, get excited about stories, get excited about words. If you come to a word that you're not sure that she understands, you can just say, and do you know what this means? And she's like, "Oh, kind of." Like, well, let's look at this. Let's explore this. And sometimes if you look up the etiology of the word and you see what it meant in Old English or Middle English, it meant something different from what it means now. And it's kind of funny. And kids love to laugh and they have a great sense of irony.
Mhm.
And they really remember this stuff. So you want to make it magical. And then after you read a wonderful story, maybe a bedtime story, and she's saying, oh, we have another story. It's like, why don't we tomorrow have you write the story that we'll read at bedtime? And those kinds of things, they just excite children about the language and about writing. It's
Yeah.
kind of a leap because it's not how we grew up. It's not how we were educated, but it really works and it's stunning.
Yeah. And just also, when your kids like to write, you can even have them do other things with the writing. Like I had mentioned earlier that I started a creative writing club. So there's things like round robins that kids can do. You can, for those of you who are home now and your kids are going back to school, that's something that's really fun to do. You can do it and have the kids pass their writing online to start a story and then have the next person continue the story. My kids used to love that. We did all different kinds of writing projects that they could present. But those were great tips, Victoria. I also just wanted my friend Lynn to just touch, before we go on to more questions, and we have some more here, I wanted Lynn to just, because she had emailed me and telling me that she was going to be on today. So I wanted her to just talk a little bit about what her homeschooling experience was.
Lynn, would you mind giving Louise another couple of minutes before she has to leave? I just saw her hand. Thank you.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Louise. Oh, wait a second.
Can't hear you.
You somehow got muted again.
Mike, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so when you were talking about the kinesthetic math, I wanted to just speak to that. So things like, one time I had found a big box of fabric that a quilter had thrown out at Goodwill when I was in Goodwill. And it was a big box and I brought it into class. And I didn't know what I was going to do with it, but I wound up, just using, there were probably about 10 or 12 different patterns. And this was with my first grade classroom, but what we wound up doing is making a project out of it where they made rag wreaths. And, that involved cutting, it involved gross motor, it involved measuring, it involved all these things, but yet they got to sit at a little table together collectively as a community, just talking and chatting and having fun. They can just go to that project anytime. And I found just filling my classroom with things like that, where we could come up with projects and ideas where they could jump into it, jump out. They never had to stay at one place for any amount of time. They could always have this choice of leaving. But yeah, I found that just doing, I would bring in stuff like, making pancakes in my classroom. That could be a lesson. You know, I would bring in all the ingredients and we'd make them we'd use the little chips to make happy faces with the chocolate chips and things like that. Those were kind of things until I got told I couldn't bring a hot plate to school anymore. So I had to do away with the pancakes. But I tried to make it as homey as I could and give them lots of opportunities. We had a classroom store where we, you know, had parents donate and kids got to spend money in the store, and just things that we could do like that that were involved their thinking as well, because a lot of these ideas came from the kids as well. And that was what I found, you know, that metacognitive strategy of having their thinking to create the environment they wanted. So anyway, that's all. Thank you for letting me have the floor again. Thank you.
Oh, thanks, Louise. And can I just jump on there and then
Yes.
turn it over to Lynn? Kids like money, and money is math. And the truth is, in our lives now, how do we most use math? We use it for our finances. And if you get them a bank account, even little kids, they let them have bank accounts, and they can see, you know, their savings grow, and they can learn about compound interest and all that. And even just in their, you know, piggy bank kind of thing, counting it, making change, you know, little, you know, a job for money and then buying things with it, that makes math really come alive.
Yeah, certainly making it real life activities is excellent. Like when we started to homeschool, we involved our kids in everything we did, and they started a bank account, they had their own checkbooks. And so they were doing real life activities, and that's math too. Everything that you do in your daily life has math in it. When we when we were going to buy a new car, we compared different cars and the prices, and we let our kids choose basically which car made more sense for us to buy.
Smart.
When we went on trips, going over the mileage and mapping and all of these things involve math and reading, pretty much everything. When my son was involved in the trains, he was so into trains for years. That involved, like, when we had him working with a model train engineer, they had to focus on the electrical for the train. I mean, that's science. He was reading the history of trains. So there's so much with any topic that your child is interested in. And you can even take some of the school topics, what Louise was saying, and make it so that the kids are really interested in it. Lynn,
You're very patient.
I'm very interested in what everybody's having to say. So thank you so much for putting this together. I really appreciated everything that Karen and Louise and Victoria shared, and Marco. But I know that things are so different right now than when I was raising my 4 kids and homeschooling them in the 90s and 2000s, because I had a choice. And right now, all of you moms didn't get that choice. So that's a little different. But honestly, I think in a way that takes a lot of the should I or shouldn't I out of it, right? Because here you are and your kids are home, and now you don't have to make the decision about whether you're going to do it. You just have to make this work for your family the best way. And I think Victoria and Karen have really done a wonderful job of showing how it doesn't have to be schoolish in that way that we're all trained and hardwired to think. It has to look like the lessons that your kids were getting in school. And there are so many different ways to cover that material. So I just want to reiterate some of what they said about playing, because I have a degree in family child studies, and I am a certified teacher. And as a homeschooling mama, I found that those things really worked against me, because everything that I learned about teaching and how children learned, we didn't do in school when I was teaching in school. That was all about keeping everybody in a place, like Karen's son had to be in a place, and like Adair had to be sitting. But that isn't how people learn. We know that's not how children learn. that children learn by doing and by using their bodies and by moving. And they learn by interacting with real tools and real people doing real work. But we don't do that in schools. And so when I came home, my kids came home, I thought, I'll do school the way we did it in school. And immediately my children let me know that that was not going to fly with them. So we did cover all of the educational academic subjects, but we did them in a way that was very authentic for them and for me, because honestly, like, I'm a person in the family too, right? And everybody had to make it work. And I think this is one of the things we're seeing now with parents who are also now in the house with their offices and their work in the same space where they're trying to live and sleep and eat. And then also their kids are there trying to learn. So I think the challenges are a little different now, simply because everybody's got to be in this one place all together. So this is a really great time for flexibility and gentleness and kindness to yourselves. Breathing is really important. If you're not taking time to breathe, please do. It really helps, I'm telling you. And if you don't have any kind of, mindfulness practice, whether it's, running or walking on a treadmill or meditating or praying or journaling, this is a great time to start a meditation or a mindfulness practice with your kids. This, by the way, we're living history right now. We are living history, and it is a wonderful time for writing journals, blogging. If your kids are more into video, they can make a video vlog on YouTube, because when they grow up and they want to tell their kids what it was like to live in 2020, they're going to want that exciting living history. They're going to want to remember the days where they were bored and the days that they were afraid, but the days where you helped them, protect them and feel safe and feel secure. Because I have 4 grown children now. 3 of them are here quarantined with me. Thank goodness, healthy and everything. But it's interesting because what their memories are not how many math problems they solved or any of that. They did those things, but that's not what they brought with them into adulthood. They brought in feeling respected and trusted and heard and seen, and having an opportunity to play and be children. We tried to preserve the space around their childhood, which is very, very short. And if you don't know that because you're living it right now, I promise you, I'm sure Victoria and Karen will agree with me, it is minutes. It goes by in minutes.
13 to 30 takes no time at all.
And it's precious time. It's precious. And, at least if you're feeling really pressured or you're feeling chaotic, just know that none of that is important. It's okay to feel what you feel, and everybody can feel their feelings, and you deserve that. But just look at it like it's a tiny snapshot, right? It's a tiny, tiny portion of time. So, I would say there are so many advantages and gifts in it. I mean, I can't even list all the gifts that I had in, being with my children for all those 20 years, but just for the month that you're home, there's no school anxiety. There's no bullying. There's none of that. At least it's a rest. It's a reset. That's what I would say. So I wish you all luck. And there are ways to do this. I actually have a very short resource out if anybody's interested. I'm not selling it here. That would be yucky, but it is available for free on Amazon Kindle right now. It's called Work at Home, School at Home. And for the next 3 days, it's free. It's a Kindle 15-minute read. You could read it in, one sitting while you're cooking something. And it is just about how to organize your space and your time when you're all here during this crisis. So, you're all welcome to pick that up. Work at Home, School at Home on Amazon Kindle.
Send me the link, Lynn.
I will do that.
Hmm.
I will do that.
That was beautiful, Lynn. And I love what you said about real work. And that's something that I wanted to mention to Jamie. I hope it's okay that I say that one of the many things Jamie does in the world is that she's my fabulous virtual assistant. And I just think about the things that you do with Main Street Vegan. And if your daughter would be interested in doing some of that, like alongside you. Like I remember my daughter loved offices and office supplies and photocopiers and things like that. And you do such beautiful graphic work and you make pictures and you make things pretty. Would it be possible to have your daughter there sometimes and say, you pick the picture, you pick the picture this time. And if it's one that, you know, has lollipops or something and you think I won't like it, just let me know Meadow did it and we'll deal with it.
So we have another question. We have some other questions here. Estella asked, oh, this was for Marco, who I don't think he's on anymore, but she asked, how did you feel about not being able to have classmates and share with peers? But I think he pretty much answered that. We had a huge homeschool community, so he was very much involved with our homeschool community. I told you my husband called us the outschoolers. We were with other kids his age and different ages, and I think that one of the reasons homeschooling was so beneficial is because my kids, some of their friends were adults, some of their friends were young children, some of their friends were their age. When I was in school, my friends were my peers. I was kind of intimidated by adults. My kids looked at a lot of my adult friends as their friends. And that's just the way it was. That was beautiful. So they socialized with all age groups, and their peers were, you know, were all ages. And they also had friends who went to school because my son was involved in the local sports team, so he had school friends, and they were both involved with community theater, so they had plenty of both. At my daughter's Sweet 16, she had 52 friends. So they were not denied of being social.
Please stop.
I think that the other question here about there's a reputation that homeschooling doesn't provide the social skills needed. And yet what I saw is the same thing that Karen talked about. For one thing, there's no age discrimination. And there's also this wonderful opportunity to find out that people are different and to really be able to spend time in other people's homes and other people's cultures. So when we were in some of the homeschool groups, were very religious. They were very evangelical Christian people doing homeschooling, and that's not our particular path. And yet my daughter was able to see, well, you know, my friends see it this way and they believe that, and, you know, I can respect that, and I'll go and watch the videos that they watch. And then, you know, I'm over here with our Sikh friends. There was a big Sikh community in Kansas City, and we had a lot of friends who were Sikhs. And I can remember she and two of her little Sikh friends volunteered to sing at nursing homes for people who were in their very latest years. And it was such an amazing thing. And even the Salvation Army lady was so surprised that these kids were so mature and how they could talk to elderly people about death. I mean, it's really something when you let children be who they are. It's stunning. So, you know, you don't want to lock your kid in a corner. Then they wouldn't have social skills. But they can have actually more because they're not in a room with 30 kids their exact age.
Nivi had said that even though she did get formal schooling and she has good memories, her mother basically homeschooled her during the holidays and the summer months. And she has like really fond memories of that. And her mother putting together, what was it, a book of poetry, Nivi?
Let me unmute myself. Yeah, so basically what my mom did was, because my mom's an anthropologist, and then she was like, you know, she had to do like a lot of research work and stuff, irrespective of whether we were off, like from school. So she would just think of these creative projects that she thought that we might want to do, and we had a lot of, you know, role to play in like choosing some of these things. So I would write a lot of poetry, and then she just said, hey, why would you like to have your own book? And that's like awesome for like a kid. So she turned that into a book. And she also asked both of my grandfathers, my maternal grandfather, to teach me classical languages. So I learned the Persian alphabet from my paternal grandfather, and I learned Sanskrit from my maternal grandfather, and that was all out of school because my school didn't offer any of these classical languages. So it was just awesome, and I just feel that even though I'm formally schooled, and I enjoyed it, but these moments, which were the school holidays, is where I just learned so much more, and I just feel more well-rounded than some of the other kids who didn't have the opportunity. So I can totally see how just having the opportunity to do that 100% of my childhood would have just, you know, and while I have no regrets, but it just means that it could have been like more like fuller. And that's the sort of thing I want to be able to provide to my future child or children.
Wow.
Yeah.
So we've run over, but I think delightfully so. So if anybody else has a comment, please unmute yourself and speak up, or put it in the comment box, because we don't want you to leave wishing you had asked something or shared something.
Oh, hi everyone.
Hi.
I'd just like to say I really appreciated this because it's all been very new and a little bit stressful, a lot of it stressful. And it never occurred to me that some kids were very different kinds of learners. I mean, I know, but kinesthetic, I'd never really thought about that. And I think the way that I learned was very structured, and the way my parents learned, and everybody just kind of thinks that's the way that learning and school is supposed to be. And all of this has just been very eye-opening to me.
Oh, thank you.
So thank you.
Wow, that's great. I
Mhm.
mean, children, I didn't know this either when I started, even though I'm an educator. I should have known that, but there's a book by Thomas Armstrong. It's got a long title. I don't remember what it is, but he talked, the entire book was about the different learning styles. And I learned that my daughter, who was in the gifted program in school, she did really well in school because she was more of like the auditory learner. She could take information, give them back exactly what they wanted. Whereas my son, when he went in, he's more of that kinesthetic learner. And he learns by doing, by being involved in projects and getting his hands involved. And he did not benefit when he was at school. I didn't see anything coming out of it for him. But I feel like even kids at school who are doing the more kinesthetic at home, and the parents are appreciating that and understanding the different learning styles of their kids, that you can help them with that.
Lane?
Yeah. Do you have anything else to say, Victoria?
Well, no, but I see Lane put her picture on. I wonder if she wants to say something. You're muted, Lane. Can you unmute, Lane? Just a second.
Oh.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah, she was
Okay.
unmuted. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So I'm not used to using this platform, so I've had my hand up for a while. I'm like the little kid in the back.
Oh, I didn't see your hand. Sorry.
I don't know how to do it right.
Oh,
I'm on a little
hand up
phone.
over here. No, I think it's us, Lane. We didn't know where to look for that.
Well, I didn't know anything either.
No,
But anyway,
see it
I don't
now,
have,
I didn't see it.
Take
I don't
your
have a
time.
question.
Lane has so much to share.
Thank you. I don't have a question as much as a bit of commentary. And one of the things is I'm very aware that there's people here maybe who are home with their kids for the first time, and they also have like schedules and jobs and other things they need to be doing. And so, and everybody's in quarantine. So this is a little bit unusual. I'm an old homeschooler like Karen and Victoria. And we got to go places and do things and see things. But one of the things I would suggest is that if you have multiple kids at home, collaborative projects, and they can be anything from starting a family newspaper. That's a wonderful thing because some people just contribute a cartoon and other people write an article and somebody else wants to take a picture or do art. But you can do other things. They can start a restaurant and you can ask them to do up a menu so that you can all come for lunch and be customers. Things like that where, build a circus at home, maybe, going down the stairs on a towel or something, but, find things that they can do collaboratively. If you have one child, they can still do this. They can make a store. They can make a restaurant. They can do things that take their time and absorption while you're trying to not be interacting all the time, but you can interact when they're done and see what they're doing and participate. And I also love Victoria's suggestion of let them sleep. Get your work done in the morning and let them sleep so that when later in the day comes, you've gotten a bit of work behind you. And the last thing I would just say is don't worry too much about the school schedule. I probably am not in a position to tell you what your school demands of you, but if you have math to do or whatever, it'll still be there when they get back and they'll be okay. So those are just a few old pearls of wisdom I throw out as an old homeschooler.
Those are great.
And Lane was one of Adair's many teachers. That's the other thing that's so cool. It's not just, okay, I'm the mom, I'm the it. And one thing I've heard Karen say, and I think I also heard Lynn say it, is our children homeschooled. It wasn't so much that we homeschooled. They homeschooled, and we were there with that wonderful phrase that Marco used as guardrails. Beautiful concept.
Yeah, that's a good concept. Yeah. And your children do want to learn, and they do it automatically. And if you think about it, when your little baby's learning to walk, you don't teach them, how to take this step and how to take that step and how to practice their leg lifts. They just keep trying, and you encourage them. So
Thank you. There's so many things that kids can do at home that they will have really a blast with. My kids, when I was one time preparing a meal and I was upstairs for a long time, it was something I was preparing for a holiday. My kids were downstairs designing an entire tennis court in my family room. They had spectators. They used the sofas as the bleachers, and they made spectators out of basketballs for heads and brooms for their bodies. And they used tape to make the tennis court on the floor. I came down and like my entire downstairs was a tennis court. So, I mean, that's, total imagination.
wonderful.
And just they enjoyed themselves so much. They were so excited about it. They took pictures of the whole thing.
Oh,
So
wonderful. When Vegan Evan was visiting here, he did that whole thing with building a fort from the furniture. If you are a vegan, you may know of Vegan Evan. He's quite an animal activist. He had a full-page ad in the New York Times in November as the voice of $1 Million Vegan. But he's 9 years old. He's homeschooled. The kid is brilliant. I mean, he spent a couple of days here, and it was hard to keep up with him. And I know people have different gifts and talents and whatnot, but if you're thinking, oh, I wonder if this really works with kids who are still kids, just check out Vegan Evan. He's quite the orator.
cool. Very
And
cool.
I'm just going to say one last thing to you all, and then I'll mute myself. I think it was John Holt said, remember, play is the work of children.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Play is the most important thing.
Yeah.
Thank
and so
you
much
so
learning
much.
comes out of play.
Yeah.
Thanks, everybody.
Yeah. Thanks. Thank you, Victoria,
Thank you
for
Karen.
coming up with this idea and for everybody who joined. I know a lot of people had to go because we went over, but this was great. This was great.
It really was. Thank you. And if anybody has any questions, I think I can speak for all of us. We are here for you. Stay safe and well.